Why did the US go to war in Iraq? George Bush justified it as a hunt for weapons of mass destruction, but none were found in Iraq. Former US Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel declared in 2007 what the world had long known. He said, "People say we're not fighting for oil. Of course we are." And the proof is for the world to see. After a decade of war, 3 big oil companies of the West set up shop in Iraq. Cut to 2022, the West is engaged in a new war. The battleground is Ukraine. Yes, Western troops are not fighting there, but their governments are supplying weapons and they're slapping sanctions. And once again, it is oil that is shaping this conflict. The West wants everyone to stop buying Russian oil. The US and some of its allies have banned Russian oil imports. Europe is planning an embargo, and developing countries like India are under pressure to comply. The plans of the West are not succeeding, so they've come up with a new strategy. The US and Europe want to form an oil cartel, a cartel that will decide how much the world ends up paying for Russian oil. Some extreme measures are being discussed here, and these could have a direct bearing on India. So what is the West planning? Allow me to explain. There are talks that are on between the US and Europe. The idea is to limit what Russia earns from oil. And the solution, they think, is a buyer's cartel. They want to rig the market against Russian oil. How would they do that? The European Union has a key role to play in this. Collectively, this bloc, the EU, will set a lower price for Russian oil. It will be less than what they're paying right now. So if Europe demands a lesser price, the others will follow. At least that's what their plan is. America is aggressively pushing for this cartel. US Treasury Secretary Yellen is spearheading the talks. This is what she said about it. I think a lot of people, including me, find it appealing from a general economic point of view. The larger the cartel, the better. Pay less for Russian oil. That's what she's suggesting. Everyone will demand the same price. No one will complain since they're getting cheap energy. At the same time, less cash goes into Russia's war chest. Sounds like a great idea, but it's not. There are fundamental issues with how the plan will be executed. First, what would this oil cartel do about existing contracts with Russian supplies? The ones that Europe has already committed to. What happens to those contracts? Second problem is divisions within Europe. Even now, the EU cannot agree on an oil embargo on Russian oil. Countries like Hungary and Slovakia are not on board. They've rejected the idea because they depend heavily on Russian energy. How will a divided Europe agree on a single price for Russian energy? The United States realizes Europe's limitations, so it is taking the matter to the G7. It is talking to the group of 7. It could force other countries to accept these price caps, countries like India and China. There are 2 options. Number 1, the insurance companies. How would this work? You see, shipments of oil are often insured in Europe or the United Kingdom. Oil shipments do not move around without insurance. That's how they work. So they will insure only those shipments that fall under the agreed price cap. G7 countries are exploring this idea, so any country outside Europe must comply with this price cap. Force Russia to sell its oil for less. Only then will their shipments be insured. That's one way for them to force the hand of others, through insurance. Option number 2 is sanctions, and this is a more targeted measure, one that America could execute single-handedly. What will these sanctions look like? The US will set the parameters of the purchase, basically dictate the price at which countries like India should buy Russian oil. What if they refuse to comply? They will be cut off from US financial systems. That's what this oil cartel would represent. US and allies say they want to ensure economic stability, that they want to stop financing the war in Ukraine. But in reality, they'll end up influencing the global prices of oil. This is economic warfare. Yes, the idea of cheap Russian energy does sound appealing. But will Moscow agree to this? Will Russia sell its oil at a price that the West dictates? Vladimir Putin is making threats. The Russian president says if Europe jettisons Russian oil, it will commit economic suicide. That's the term he used. Moscow has already cut gas supplies to countries which refuse to pay in rubles. What if Russia decides to cut global oil supplies? It will cost them a lot, but it will also hurt others. The war and Western sanctions have weakened the global economy. Shortages of all kinds, from food to fuel, are driving up inflation. Many countries are struggling to stay afloat. The West now wants to turn this conflict, the conflict in Ukraine, into an oil war. Just like the war in Iraq, it's a conflict that the world can do without. It's also a conflict that the world is paying a price for. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.